GREENDEX is a really good study internationally with a large sample size of over 17,000 consumers in 17 countries. What we can see in the next slide is that the UK actually is in 14th place of the 17th, placed only ahead of the French, Canadians and Americans. Interestingly, more developing economies sit at the top of this table, possibly demonstrating a link between the maturity of the economy, how long they've been exposed to these sustainability issues in the mainstream, and the effect that that has on their stated perceptions, and potentially through to how much those behaviours have kind of moved into the norm and therefore not necessarily a kind of top of mind consideration. It's something that they start to automate a bit more. Numerous studies also show that the environment has gone down the list for a lot of people during these economic times, but again this is a sample-based piece. The Earth Sense study in this slide also found that the economic dip, the amount extra people were prepared to pay additionally for greener products also decreased proportionally. We like a stat otherwise from DoubleClick Performix, which shows that all things equal, so that's cost, quality and convenience, people would choose the greener option. Who will pay more though, or anything at all for that matter, depends on the segments. It depends on the propensity to price switch, which everyone has at some level in every single segment. A comprehensive DEFRA study into the segmentation, also green communications, found that 2/3 of the sample will seek information on a packaging to help them make their choices more environmentally preferable. But the same amount roughly also agree that the information shown on most packaging is difficult to understand. 58% of respondents to the survey agreed with the statement. A lot of companies nowadays to pretend to be just green just to charge higher prices, showing how keeping the messages simple, easy and accessible and balanced is really important to us as marketeers and environmental professionals. The National Marketing Institute in 2009 found that reputation of the company, particularly for the greener segments, does make a big difference in purchase decision, and that 56% of people agreed that a company that does not make environmentally preferable goods can still be considered responsible in other ways. This is good news because it shows that some organisations that are naturally closer to responsibility through the sectors and industries in which they operate. However, everyone can compete in this area because it's all comparative. So what are the actions that people are taking? This data from National Marketing Institute shows that generally people will frequently take easier, cheaper options towards the top of the graph. Things like turning down the thermostat, saving water, changing the light bulbs, those sorts of things. Things that are really easy and quick to do. However, these are a no-brainer, and some segments are more inclined to do these things rather than others, as we'll cover later. But as we move down the graph, we'll see that the proportion of the segment that are involved in doing those other things, generally things that have got higher costs in terms of financial or time resource, actually goes down. This, the inconvenience of something like carpooling or public transport goes up. So fairly common sense, but it does confirm to us what a lot of us know to be true. There are indeed many barriers that can get in the way of more sustainable behaviours and people's good intentions, the things that people would like to do at an attitudinal level. Earth Sense found that discouraging reasons can be captured in some of the following. The top one being lack of trust in the claims being made by organisations. What we've really got to take away from this is a very clear key message, is that the damage that greenwash can do. That's why it's crucial for us to work with best practice in claims, thorough substantiation, actually building trust with our stakeholders. The second to fourth points in the graph all look at what's called the tragedy of the commons. People discouraged from making an effort because they feel that others, whether that's individuals, companies, governments, even countries, just aren't pulling their weight. Or why should we do this in the UK if India and China are developing so fast with such a big population and they're maybe not making their effort? That's the sort of perception that some people can have. It just doesn't feel fair to them. They feel that the effort that they're making and the results that they'll achieve will be too small as part of the overall global picture to actually make a difference. This is particularly true of some segments that we'll look at later. Yet, as we know as sustainability professionals, that the small steps are what come together to make the big difference. And that's why we really need to encourage and empower people to make these changes where possible, and where there isn't difficulty in doing so, actually take some of the decision out their hands through more preferable models of the same piece. Other discouraging factors include the difference in cost. So, for example, fresh veg costing more than bulk pack or frozen vegetables. Green not seen as being an important aspect of that particular category of product or service. Or the labelled information, for instance, is just outright confusing. The language we use also needs to be carefully considered, substantiated and targeted towards specific segments. What resonates for some might cause scepticism in others. This DEFRA research has found that greener segments trust advertising claims more, but this does depend on the nature of the advert. Many of the terms that people are most familiar with are as we'd expect. Things like recyclable. But interestingly, many of the terms that people are most familiar with are also under blanket bans suggested by the ASA, but also reiterated in the DEFRA reports. Things like sustainable as a generic term or environmentally friendly in themselves, which are incredibly difficult to reach and substantiate. The key to this was that although terms might be familiar, they are not necessarily understood, and therefore there becomes a risk of misselling and, as we call it, greenwash. The study also showed us how people use a frame of reference from one particular term to actually understand another. So, for instance, there's a very logical leap to people understanding carbon footprint and all the emphasis that's been put on that over the last few years, and that leads them into newer categories of innovation and being able, they believe, to understand the basics of, for instance, what a water footprint might be. However, actually, when we delve a little bit deeper, it's going to be the case that people won't understand 80% of what's actually involved in some of these pieces. It also showed that different terms are better for different types of product and service labelling. So, for instance, more people resonated with the claim energy efficient washing machine because of the life cycle usage of that washing machine, rather than a green or eco washing machine, something that actually would be difficult to substantiate as well. So it's about making it meaningful and resonating the right product and service in the right ways for different individuals.